Dr. Isaiah Boone rubbed his eyes as he pulled out of the hospital parking lot just after midnight. The night had been long, too long. 2 emergency surgeries, a code blue that lasted nearly an hour, and a stack of charts he still hadn't finished signing. His shoulders ached. His scrubs were stained with sweat and something he didn't want to think about, and all he wanted was his bed. But first, the drive home. He knew this route by heart. Left on Oak Ridge, past the old tire shop that always smelled like burnt rubber, then through the industrial stretch where streetlights flickered more than they shone. It wasn't the prettiest part of town, but it was the fastest way back to his neighborhood. A quiet pocket of brick homes with well-kept lawns and porch swings that creaked in the summer breeze. He'd lived there for 3 years with his wife, Lena, and their 2 cats who ruled the house like tiny, furry monarchs. Isaiah wasn't a man who drew attention. He spoke softly, listened more than he talked, and carried himself with a calm that patients often mistook for detachment. But those who knew him, nurses who'd worked night shifts with him, neighbors who'd borrowed his ladder, the teenager down the street whose asthma he'd treated for free, knew better. He cared deeply, maybe too deeply. He'd turned down higher-paying jobs at private hospitals because he believed everyone deserved care, not just those who could afford it. Tonight, though, he was just tired, bone-tired. He turned up the radio slightly, some late-night jazz station playing a Miles Davis track, and let the music fill the silence. The road was nearly empty. A delivery truck rumbled in the distance. A stray cat darted across the pavement. Normal, quiet, safe. Then, the red light. He slowed to a stop at the intersection near the corner store, the one with the peeling, green awning and the flickering neon open sign. He'd bought coffee there more times than he could count. As he waited, headlights appeared in his rearview mirror. Then another set. 2 police cruisers pulled up behind him fast, too fast. Before he could even process it, an officer was at his window, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, blinding him. "Step out of the vehicle," the voice barked. Isaiah blinked, shielding his eyes. "Officer, is everything okay?" "Now hands where I can see them." His stomach tightened. He raised his hand slowly. "I'm Dr. Boone. I just got off shift at City General. I live 3 blocks from here." The officer didn't respond. The second officer approached from the passenger side, hand resting on his holster. Isaiah's pulse quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "I have my hospital ID in my wallet. I can show it to you." "Don't move," the first officer snapped.
"Keep your hands on the wheel." Isaiah did as he was told.
He wasn't reaching for anything. He wasn't even breathing too hard. But something in the air had shifted, something sharp and wrong. Then came the command, "Show me your hands." "I am," Isaiah said, voice calm but firm. "They're right here." Maybe it was the way he turned his head slightly to look at the officer. Maybe it was the shadow from the streetlight falling across his shoulder. Maybe it was just fear, raw, unthinking fear on the other side of the badge. What happened next unfolded in seconds, but would haunt everyone involved for years. A shout. A misread motion. A gun drawn. "No," Isaiah started. 2 shots cracked through the night. The first hit his shoulder, spinning him sideways. The second tore into his abdomen. He gasped, pain white-hot and sudden, and slumped against the steering wheel. The horn blared once, then died as his foot slipped off the pedal. Silence. Then radio chatter. Urgent, clipped voices. Shots fired. Suspect down, requesting backup and EMS. But there was no suspect. There was only a doctor in bloodied scrubs, bleeding onto the driver's seat of his 10-year-old sedan, his breath coming in shallow, wet rasps. Inside the car, the jazz music still played softly, now a cruel contrast to the chaos outside. At the hospital, his own hospital, they rushed him into Trauma Bay. 2 nurses who'd shared coffee with him that morning now worked in grim silence, cutting away his clothes, inserting lines, calling for blood. One of them whispered a prayer under her breath. Another fought back tears. He survived the night. Barely. Meanwhile, downtown, in a sterile briefing room, the official story began to take shape. Officers responded to a nearby armed robbery, a spokesperson told reporters before dawn. Suspect fled on foot. Vehicle matched description. During attempted detainment, individual made a threatening movement. Officers discharged their weapons in self-defense. No mention of a medical ID. No mention of calm compliance. No mention that the so-called armed Robbery at the corner store involved a teenager with a fake toy gun who'd already been apprehended. 2 blocks away, 10 minutes before Isaiah even reached the intersection. The dash cam footage, technical malfunction. The body cams, not activated in time. Witnesses? None came forward. At least none the department acknowledged. By sunrise, the narrative was set. A dangerous encounter, a justified shooting, a city grateful for its brave officers. But in room 314, hooked to machines that beeped like a fragile heartbeat, Isaiah drifted in and out of consciousness. When he surfaced, it was to pain, confusion, and the crushing weight of betrayal. He hadn't done anything wrong. He'd followed every instruction. He'd identified himself. He'd tried to help, and they'd shot him anyway. Lena arrived just after 6 a.m., still in her pajamas, hair tangled, eyes wide with terror. She'd gotten the call from a nurse who knew her. No one from the police had contacted her. No one had explained why her husband, a man who stitched up gunshot wounds for a living, was now lying in a hospital bed with 2 bullet holes in him. She held his hand, whispering his name over and over, as if saying it enough times could undo what had happened. Outside, the city woke up. Cars honked, buses rumbled. People went to work, unaware that just hours earlier a life had nearly ended at a red light for no reason at all, and the 2 officers who pulled the trigger? They were sent home on paid leave, standard procedure, they were told, for your safety and the integrity of the investigation. But already, behind closed doors, they were rehearsing their story. Aligning details, erasing doubts. They didn't know about Lena's next move. They didn't know she still had a number saved in her phone from years ago, one she'd hoped never to use. And they certainly didn't know about the man who would soon step off a plane from Lisbon, eyes sharp as flint, walking with the quiet certainty of someone who'd seen too much death to be fooled by lies. But that was tomorrow. Tonight. There was only the hum of machines, the scent of antiseptic, and a good man wondering why the world felt so suddenly unsafe, even when he'd done everything right. Quen 3 Max 2:28 p.m. Lena sat in the hospital cafeteria the next morning, clutching a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw headlights, heard gunshots, felt the weight of Isaiah's hand going limp in hers. She kept replaying the moment she'd walked into his room, how pale he looked, how the bandages wrapped around his torso seemed too big for the man she knew, a man who'd once carried a neighbor's refrigerator up 3 flights of stairs just because he was asked. She needed answers. Not vague statements or rehearsed lines from a press release. Real answers. So she went to the police department herself. The front desk officer barely looked up when she approached. She gave her name, explained she was Isaiah Boone's wife, and asked for information about the investigation. The officer typed something slowly, then said, "Ma'am, it's an active case. We can't release details. But my husband was shot," she said, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He's a doctor. He wasn't armed. He didn't run. He didn't resist. Why won't anyone talk to me?" The officer finally met her eyes just for a second, before glancing toward a supervisor down the hall. "You'll have to speak with internal affairs. They're handling it." She waited 2 hours in a stiff plastic chair before someone finally came out. A man in a wrinkled suit introduced himself as a liaison. He spoke in calm, practiced tones, offering condolences but no clarity. "We understand your concern," he said, "but due process must be followed. The officers involved are on administrative leave as per protocol." "Protocol," Lena repeated. "My husband almost died. There's no video, no witnesses, no explanation. That's your protocol?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, I assure you this is being taken seriously." But his eyes said otherwise. She left frustrated, angry, and more alone than she'd ever felt. Back at the hospital, she found a nurse waiting outside Isaiah's room. "A reporter called," the nurse whispered, "from the local paper. They're running a short piece this afternoon, just repeating what the department said. Something about a suspect matching description. They didn't even use Isaiah's name." Lena's stomach dropped. They were erasing him, turning a respected physician into a faceless suspect in a story that wasn't even true. That night, she sat by his bedside, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. He was awake now, groggy from pain meds, but lucid enough to speak. "They're lying," he murmured. "I didn't do anything. I know, she said, squeezing his hand. And I won't let them get away with it. But how? She wasn't a lawyer. She didn't know how to fight a system built to protect its own. Still, she started digging. She called the corner store, spoke to the clerk, a young man named Dev, who confirmed the real suspect had been caught before Isaiah even arrived. But when she asked if he'd told the police, Dev went quiet. They told me not to talk, he finally admitted. Said it could complicate things. I've got a family, you know. She understood. Fear was a powerful silencer. Then she remembered the number. It was tucked in an old address book written in her mother-in-law's neat cursive years ago. Elias Boone, Isaiah's father, a man who'd left when Isaiah was 10 and hadn't been back since. They'd exchanged birthday cards, occasional calls on holidays, but nothing more. Isaiah rarely spoke of him, and when he did, it was with a mix of resentment and quiet longing. Lena had never met him, but she'd heard stories. Vague, almost mythical tales from Isaiah's childhood. A soldier who'd served in places with no names on maps. A man who could track a deer by the bend of a leaf. Who once disarmed a drunk with his bare hands at a bus station. Most of it sounded like exaggeration. But right now, she needed more than facts. She needed someone who wouldn't be ignored. She dialed the number late that night, heart pounding. A voice answered on the third ring, deep, calm, with a slight accent she couldn't place. Hello? Mr. Boone? She said, voice shaking just a little. This is Lena, Isaiah's wife. A pause. Then quietly, is he hurt? He was shot, she said. By police. They're saying he was a suspect in a robbery. But he wasn't. He was coming home from work. Another silence. Longer this time. She could almost hear the gears turning in his mind, thousands of miles away. Is he alive? He asked. Yes, but it's bad. I'll be there tomorrow. No questions. No hesitation. Just those 4 words. She hung up, tears finally spilling over. For the first time since the shooting, she didn't feel entirely alone. Meanwhile, downtown, the 2 officers sat in a dimly lit diner booth, far from their usual precinct hangouts. One picked at his fries, eyes darting to the door every time it opened. The other stared into his coffee like it held answers. They're gonna find out, the first one muttered. That store clerk saw everything. He won't talk, the other said, but his voice lacked conviction. And the dash cam's gone. No proof. But what if someone checks the backup server, or the traffic cams? Or, stop, the second officer snapped, then lowered his voice. We did what we had to do. He moved wrong. In that light, he looked threatening. He was wearing hospital scrubs, the first officer whispered. He had a stethoscope around his neck. A beat of silence. Then the second officer leaned forward. Listen, we stick to the story. We say he reached for his waistband. We say he ignored commands. That's it, nothing else. The first officer nodded, but his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Back at the hospital, Lena dozed in the chair beside Isaiah's bed. In her dream, she was driving his car, stopped at the same red light. Headlights behind her, doors slamming. She woke with a gasp. Isaiah was watching her. You should go home, he said softly. Rest. I'm not leaving you, she said. He didn't argue. He knew her too well. The next morning, the local news aired a short segment. Police confirm an officer-involved shooting early Tuesday morning. Authorities state the individual matched the description of a suspect in a nearby armed robbery. No charges have been filed. The department emphasizes its commitment to transparency. Transparency. The word felt like a joke. Lena turned off the TV. She called a civil rights attorney recommended by a friend. The lawyer listened carefully, asked for all the details, and said, This reeks of a cover-up. But without evidence, it's their word against yours. We have the store clerk, Lena said. Does he have the courage to testify? She didn't answer. That afternoon, a man in a worn leather jacket and faded jeans walked into the hospital. He carried no luggage, just a small duffel bag. His hair was gray at the temples, his face lined with years and sun. But his eyes, sharp, watchful, were unmistakably Isaiah's. He didn't go to the front desk. He went straight to room 314. Lena opened the door to find him standing there, silent, gaze fixed on the bed where his son lay. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Elias Boone stepped inside, closed the door gently behind him, and said only, I'm here. Elias didn't say much that first day. He stood by the window in Isaiah's hospital room, arms crossed, watching the street below like he was reading secrets in the way cars turned or how pedestrians moved. He asked the nurses only 2 questions. What's his condition? And who's in charge of his care? When the attending physician came by, Elias listened quietly, nodding once when told Isaiah would recover but needed time. Then he pulled a chair to the far corner of the room, sat down and stayed. Lena watched him from across the bed. She'd expected anger, shouting, maybe even threats, but this quiet presence was somehow more unnerving. He didn't pace. He didn't demand answers. He just observed, like a man used to waiting for the right moment to act. Later that evening, after Isaiah drifted off to sleep, Elias finally spoke. "Tell me everything," he said, voice low but steady. So she did. From the red light to the gunshot, from the hospital chaos to the police stonewalling, from the missing footage to the store clerk too scared to talk, she left nothing out, not even her fear that no one would believe them. Elias listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood, walked to the sink, filled a paper cup with water, and handed it to her. "You've done good," he said simply. The next morning, he was gone before sunrise. Lena found a note on the nightstand. "Back soon. Keep him calm." She didn't know where he'd gone, but she trusted him enough not to panic. By noon, he returned, clean-shaven, wearing a plain button-down shirt, looking less like a ghost from the past and more like someone who meant business. His first stop wasn't the police station. It was the corner store. The clerk, Dev, recognized him immediately, not from photos but from the way he carried himself. There was a stillness about Elias, a kind of controlled energy that made people pay attention without him saying a word. "I'm Isaiah Boone's father," he said, standing just inside the doorway. Dev swallowed hard. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "I know," Elias replied. "But you saw what really happened, and I need you to tell the truth." Dev glanced toward the street, then back at Elias. "They'll come after me." "Not if we're smarter than they are," Elias said. He didn't threaten. He didn't plead. He just stated it like fact. He stayed for 20 minutes. When he left, Dev had a new phone number written on a receipt, the attorney Lena had contacted. And for the first time, the young man looked like he might actually use it. From there, Elias went to the police station, not to file a complaint or demand a meeting. He just walked in, nodded at the front desk, and asked to see the public records request form. The officer handed it over, confused. Elias filled it out slowly, requesting all available footage, radio logs, and incident reports related to the shooting. He cited state transparency laws. He paid the copying fee in cash. Then he left, no drama, no confrontation, just procedure, used precisely, deliberately. Back at the hospital, he sat with Isaiah, who was finally strong enough to speak in full sentences. They didn't talk about the shooting at first. Instead, Elias asked about his work, his patients, the garden Lena had started in the backyard. Small things, human things, but then Isaiah said, "Why are you here, Dad?" Elias looked at him for a long time. "Because I should have been here long before this." Isaiah didn't respond. There was too much history in those words, years of silence, missed birthdays, unanswered letters. But for the first time, it didn't feel like blame. It felt like regret. And maybe, just maybe, an offer to do better. That night, Elias made 3 phone calls. The first was to a retired military lawyer he'd served with in Bosnia, someone who knew how investigations worked, how evidence disappeared, and how to find it again. The second was to a woman who now worked in digital forensics for a federal agency. They'd trained together decades ago. She owed him a favor. The third call was to a journalist, a woman who'd embedded with his unit during a deployment no one talked about. She'd seen him keep his cool under fire. She trusted him. By the end of the week, things began to shift. The forensic contact found something, a partial backup of the patrol car's dashcam system, stored on a secondary server the department used for routine maintenance. It hadn't been wiped. Not completely. Enough frames remained to show Isaiah sitting still, hands visible. When the first shot was fired, the journalist tracked down 2 more witnesses, a delivery driver who'd been idling nearby and a night shift janitor walking home. Both had seen the encounter. Both were willing to talk, off the record at first, but they were talking. And the retired lawyer? He drafted a letter to the state attorney's office outlining clear violations of protocol, possible obstruction, and the legal risks of ignoring contradictory evidence. Meanwhile, the two officers started to unravel. One began skipping union meetings. He stopped answering calls from his partner. He showed up at a local church one evening not to pray, but to sit in the back pew for hours, head in his hands. The other doubled down. He gave an off-the-record interview to a sympathetic local blogger, repeating the "he reached for his waistband" line. But his story had holes now. Details that didn't match the partial footage, timelines that didn't add up. The blogger published it anyway, but comment sections filled with questions. Why no weapon? Why no body cam? Why is the store clerk saying something different? Pressure was building. Elias felt it. He didn't celebrate. He didn't gloat. He just kept moving, quietly, methodically. One afternoon, he took a walk past the police union headquarters. He didn't go inside. He just stood across the street for a few minutes, watching people come and go. Then he turned and walked away. But someone inside saw him, and that someone told the officers. That night, the guiltier of the two called his union rep in a panic. "He's here," he whispered. Boone's father. "He's not like the others. He's different." The rep tried to calm him. "He's just a civilian. He can't do anything." But both of them knew that wasn't true. Back at the house, Isaiah had been discharged by then, recovering at home with Lena. Elias helped fix a leaky kitchen faucet. It was a small thing, but it mattered. Isaiah watched from the couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea. "You didn't have to come back," Isaiah said softly. Elias tightened the last bolt, turned the water on. No drip. "Some things," he said, wiping his hands on a towel, "you don't walk away from twice." There was no grand speech. No dramatic vow. Just a man doing what he should have done years ago. Showing up. And in that quiet moment, with the faucet fixed and the sun setting through the kitchen window, something began to mend. Not everything, not yet, but enough to believe that truth, when pursued with patience and precision, could still win, even against a system built to hide it. The first real crack came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. A man in a hooded sweatshirt walked into the state attorney's office downtown, head down, shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear. He didn't give his name. He asked to speak with someone not connected to the local police. A junior prosecutor took him to a quiet interview room, offered him coffee and let him talk. What came out wasn't a confession. Not exactly, but it was close. The man, the younger of the two officers involved, said he'd been having nightmares, that he kept seeing Isaiah's face in the moment before the shots, that his partner had yelled "gun," even though there was no gun, that they'd both known right after it happened that something was wrong. But instead of calling it in, they'd stuck to the story. Made it worse, buried it deeper. "I didn't want this," he said, voice breaking. "I joined to help people." The prosecutor listened, recorded every word, and promised anonymity, for now. But the damage to the official story was done. One side had buckled. Within hours, the department knew something was off. Internal affairs scrambled. The police chief called an emergency meeting. The union lawyer showed up unannounced at the station, briefcase in hand, jaw set tight. Rumors spread among the rank and file. One of them flipped. "They're bringing in outside investigators." Meanwhile, the partial dashcam footage recovered by Elias's contact was quietly authenticated by an independent tech firm. It showed without doubt that Isaiah had not reached for anything. His hands were on the steering wheel. His window was down. He was speaking calmly when the first shot rang out. The journalist Elias had contacted published a careful fact-based piece. No speculation. Just timestamps, witness quotes, and a side-by-side comparison of the police statement versus the recovered footage. She didn't name the officers. She didn't call for riots or revenge. She just laid out the contradictions and asked why no one had investigated them. The public response was swift. Not violent, not chaotic, but firm. Community leaders held a press conference outside City Hall. Local clergy called for transparency. Even some retired officers spoke up, saying, "This isn't how we were trained." The department tried to regain control. They released a new statement. "New information has come to light. The case is under expanded review." They announced the lead detective had taken medical leave, a convenient fiction everyone saw through. They claimed the missing body cam footage was lost due to equipment failure. but tech experts pointed out that most modern systems auto-upload to cloud backups. If it was truly gone, someone had deleted it on purpose. Then came the clerk from the corner store. Dev, the young man who'd been too scared to speak, walked into the same attorney's office where Lena had gone weeks earlier. This time he brought his mother with him. "I can't sleep," he told the lawyer. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him bleeding in that car." And I stayed quiet. He gave a full statement, signed it, agreed to testify if needed. The delivery driver and the janitor followed. Their accounts matched Dev's and the footage. Isaiah hadn't run. He hadn't resisted. He'd done exactly what the officers asked, until they shot him anyway. The cover-up, once so tightly woven, was now fraying at every edge. Elias watched it all unfold from the porch of Isaiah's house, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He didn't attend the protests. He didn't give interviews, but he was far from idle. He'd been meeting with the attorney, reviewing evidence, making sure every detail held up. He knew how these things could collapse, not from lack of truth, but from sloppy handling of it. One evening, as dusk settled over the neighborhood, he walked downtown, not to the police station, but to the union headquarters. He didn't go inside. He just stood near the entrance for a full minute, calm and still, while the union president happened to step out for a cigarette. Their eyes met. The president froze. He recognized Elias instantly, not from photos, but from reputation. Stories from old-timers, whispers at conferences. "That Boone guy, you don't cross him. He doesn't yell. He just makes problems disappear." Elias didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He held the man's gaze just long enough for the message to land. "I know what you're doing, and it's not working," then turned and walked away. The union president crushed his cigarette with a shaking hand and went back inside. Inside the department, panic set in. The second officer, the one who doubled down, started packing a bag. His wife found him at 2 a.m., staring at their savings account on his laptop. "We can't stay here," he muttered. But there was nowhere to run. Airports, border crossings, even bus stations were being monitored. And he knew deep down that running would only make him look guiltier. The next morning, the state attorney's office announced a formal criminal investigation. Not just into the shooting, but into possible obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, and conspiracy to falsify official records. A special prosecutor was appointed, one with no ties to the local force. The two officers were ordered to surrender their badges and guns. Their paid leave was revoked. They were told not to speak to each other or to anyone without legal counsel present. The city council held an emergency session. Residents packed the chamber not with chance, but with quiet determination. They demanded policy changes, mandatory body cams that auto-activate, independent civilian review boards, stricter use of force guidelines. One council member tried to downplay the incident as an isolated tragedy. An elderly woman stood up and said, "My grandson is a doctor too." What if it had been him? The room fell silent. Back at home, Isaiah watched the news with Lena. He was stronger now, walking without help, eating real food, even joking again. But the anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. "They tried to make me the bad guy," he said quietly. "Just because I was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Lena squeezed his hand. "But you're not alone anymore." Elias sat in the kitchen sharpening a pocket knife he'd carried for 30 years. He didn't look up, but he heard every word. That night, as rain tapped against the windows, the three of them ate dinner together. Simple food, warm bread, the kind of meal that feels like healing. No one talked about court dates or headlines. They talked about the garden, about a movie they'd all missed, about the neighbor's dog that kept stealing Isaiah's slippers. But beneath the normalcy, something powerful had shifted. The truth wasn't just surviving, it was winning. Not with violence, not with rage, but with persistence. With witnesses who found their courage. With a father who came back when it mattered most. And somewhere downtown in a dimly lit office, a prosecutor printed out the final version of the charges. Aggravated assault, falsifying evidence, conspiracy. Enough to put 2 men behind bars for a very long time. The system hadn't fixed itself. People had forced it to. One honest word, one recovered file, one act of courage at a time. And the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, It felt like justice might actually arrive. The courtroom wasn't grand or dramatic like in movies. It was small with scuffed wooden benches, flickering fluorescent lights, and a faint smell of old coffee and floor wax. But what happened inside carried weight far beyond its plain walls. Charges had been filed. Not just for the shooting, but for the lies that followed. The altered reports, the missing footage, the pressure on witnesses. The younger officer had taken a plea deal in exchange for full testimony. The other stood trial, pale and hollow-eyed, his lawyer struggling to explain away the recovered dashcam clips and the chorus of witnesses who now refused to stay silent. Isaiah sat in the front row beside Lena, dressed in a simple button-down shirt, his shoulder still stiff from the wound. He didn't come for revenge. He came because someone had to bear witness, not just to what was done to him, but to what happens when truth is buried and then clawed back into the light. The trial lasted 10 days. There were no outbursts, no dramatic confessions, just facts laid out one by one. The timestamps, the radio logs that showed the real suspect had already been in custody, the forensic report confirming Isaiah's hands were empty, the testimony from the store clerk who finally spoke without shaking. When the jury returned, their verdict was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Isaiah didn't stop. He walked straight to the car, Lena at his side, Elias a few steps behind, silent, watchful, present. The city didn't erupt. There were no riots, no fires. Instead, people gathered peacefully in the square downtown, holding candles, not signs. Some wore white coats in solidarity. Others just stood quietly, as if honoring the idea that fairness shouldn't be rare. Within weeks, the police chief resigned. The union president stepped down. The city council passed sweeping reforms. Body cams that auto-record during all stops, a civilian oversight board with real power, mandatory de-escalation training, and a public dashboard tracking all use-of-force incidents. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Isaiah returned to the hospital part-time, easing back into work. His patients greeted him like a hero, but he never acted like one. "I just wanted to go home that night," he'd say if anyone brought it up. Nothing more, but something in him had changed. He started mentoring young med students from underserved neighborhoods, telling them, "Your voice matters, even when people try to silence it." He also began volunteering with a legal aid group that helped victims of police misconduct navigate the system. Not out of bitterness, but because he knew how easy it was to get lost in the noise. Lena went back to her school, but she carried herself differently now, stronger, clearer. She organized a community forum on public safety, inviting officers, residents, and city leaders to talk, not argue. "We don't have to choose between safety and justice," she told the crowd. "We deserve both." And Elias? He stayed. He hadn't planned to. He'd booked a one-way ticket back to Portugal, thinking his job was done once the truth came out. But the morning he was supposed to leave, he found Isaiah struggling to fix a loose step on the back porch. Without a word, Elias grabbed a hammer from the garage and got to work. Days turned into weeks. He slept on the couch, drank too much black coffee, and started taking evening walks around the neighborhood. People nodded when they saw him, not with fear but respect. He fixed Mrs. Rivera's mailbox after a storm, helped Mr. Chen carry groceries, sat with Isaiah on the porch most nights, talking about everything and nothing, old movies, the weather, the way magnolia trees bloom in late spring. One evening, as fireflies blinked in the yard, Isaiah finally asked the question he'd been holding on to. "Why did you really come back?" Elias didn't answer right away. He watched a moth circle the porch light, then said, "I spent most of my life thinking strength meant never looking back, that if you kept moving, the past couldn't catch you. But it does. It always does." He turned to his son. "You were shot because someone saw a threat where there was none. I left because I thought I wasn't enough. We both paid for other people's fears, but you didn't let it break you. And that reminded me that maybe I could still be a father, even late." Isaiah looked down, then nodded. No grand forgiveness, no tearful reunion, just two men choosing to try again. A few days later, they drove to a nursery on the edge of town. They picked out a young magnolia sapling, strong roots, healthy leaves. Back home, they dug the hole together, Isaiah moving slowly but steadily, Elias guiding the tree straight as they packed the soil around it. "It'll take years to bloom," Isaiah said, wiping sweat from his brow. "That's the point," Elias replied. Some things are worth waiting for. The tree stood in the corner of the backyard, small but stubborn, reaching for the sun. It wouldn't erase what happened. Nothing could. But it was a promise. A quiet act of faith that good things could still grow, even after violence, even after silence, even after years of distance. Life didn't snap back to normal. It couldn't. But it found a new rhythm, one built on honesty, on showing up, on refusing to let lies stand unchallenged. Isaiah still startled at sudden noises. Lena sometimes woke in the night, heart racing, imagining red lights and gunshots. And Elias still scanned every room he entered. Old habits hard to shed, but they were learning to carry their scars without letting them define them. One Sunday morning, the three of them sat on the porch with mugs of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky in soft golds and pinks. A neighbor walked by with her dog, waved. A bird landed on the new magnolia branch, chirped once and flew off. No one spoke for a long time. They didn't need to, because the real victory wasn't just in the verdict or the policy changes. It was here, in this quiet moment, in the simple act of being together, safe, alive, and finally honest with each other. And sometimes, that's enough to begin again.